The Bridge That Remembered Everyone. The Hearthside Chronicles, Book 5, Chapter 1. The Last Coach of the Day. The last coach of the day came into Ashcombe Ford at the hour when the light gives up gently, without any fuss, the way a candle gives up when somebody closes a door too quickly in the next room. There was one passenger left inside it by then. Her name was Nell Vane, and she had been travelling since morning, with a small brown case on her knees, and a letter in her pocket that she had read so many times the folds had gone soft as cloth. The coachman slowed his horses at the top of the hill, because everybody slowed at the top of that hill, and because the horses had already decided to. Below them the valley lay in a low blue haze, and the river went through it slowly, the way honey goes off a spoon. There were willows leaning over the water with their hair down. There were chimneys sending up thin grey threads that did not hurry anywhere. And across the river, joining the near bank to the far one, there was a bridge of pale stone with 3 round arches, and each arch held its own reflection underneath it, so that from the hill it looked as though there were 6. "That is Ashcombe Ford, miss," the coachman said. "I know it," said Nell. "You have been before then?" "A long while ago. I was small." The coachman made the sound that older men make when they do not wish to pry but would not mind being told more. Nell did not tell him more, because she was busy looking. She had not expected the bridge to be the first thing she recognized. She had expected the church, or the green, or the long white front of the inn, but it was the bridge that came up out of her memory with its shoulders squared, and it seemed to her, for one foolish and pleasant moment, that the bridge had come up out of the valley to meet her. They went down the hill at a walk. The road ran along the water meadows, and the grass there was full of the last warmth of the day, and there was a smell of cut hay and cold river that was so exactly the smell of being 7 years old that Nell had to put her hand flat against the window glass. Then the wheels changed their note. That was the bridge beginning. Wood and mud and gravel gave way to stone, and the sound went from a rumble to something rounder and older, a sound with a small echo underneath it, coming up off the water and out of the arches. Nell counted without meaning to 3 arches, 22 paces of horse and wheel from bank to bank, and then the softer note again on the far side, and it was over, and they were in the village, and the whole crossing had taken less time than it takes to say good night properly. But she had felt something in the middle of it, not a jolt, nothing so rude as a jolt. It was more like the feeling of walking into a room where somebody has just said your name and stopped. The coach put her down by the inn, and the coachman handed down her case, and the horses breathed out great warm clouds into air that was already turning cool. "Mind the middle of the bridge in the evening," he said. "Why?" He seemed surprised at himself for having said it. "No reason. Only that folk do, they say mind it, and then they go and stand on it anyway." He touched his hat and drove away, and Nell was left standing on the cobbles with the sky going the colour of a plum above her. At the near end of the bridge, a man in a long coat was lighting a lantern. Chapter 2. The Cottage on Milk Lane. The cottage was the fourth one along Milk Lane, and it had been her grandmother's, and now, by way of a solicitor's letter and a quantity of dust, it was hers. The key turned with a complaint. The door came in over the flagstones with that dragging sound that old doors make, as though they are reluctant to admit that anything has changed. Inside, the air was cold in the way that only unlived-in rooms are cold. It was not a bitter cold. It was more like the coolness of a church in August, a coolness that has been waiting patiently, keeping itself for somebody. Nell set down her case. There was the dresser with the blue plates. There was the settle by the hearth with its cushion gone flat as a biscuit. There was the low beam over the fireplace that her grandmother had painted white, and that everybody, without exception, still hit their head upon. And there was the hearth itself, swept clean, laid ready, with kindling crossed over the paper, and 3 split logs stacked beside the grate. Somebody had done that. Somebody had come in and laid a fire for a woman who might arrive on Thursday or Friday or not at all. Nell knelt down and struck a match. The paper caught and went up gold, and the kindling took, and then there was the small important crackle that is the oldest good news in the world. She sat back on her heels and watched it. The light climbed up the walls. The room came out of the dark, one object at a time, the way a face comes out of the dark, and it seemed to her that the cottage let out a breath it had been holding for 2 years. She found tea in a tin with a picture of a pheasant on it. She found a cup. She found, in the drawer of the dresser, a bundle of string, a bone button, and a folded piece of paper with a shopping list on it in handwriting she had not seen since she was a child, and she put that back in the drawer very carefully and closed it and did not open it again that night. Then she ate bread and butter standing up, because there was nobody to tell her not to, and she carried her cup to the window. Milk Lane sloped down to the river. From the window, across the tops of 2 garden walls, she could see the bridge. The lantern was burning at the near end of it. There was another at the far end. Between them the parapet went along in a pale line, and the water beneath had gone black and silver, and the willows had turned into shapes rather than trees. There was nobody on the bridge. And yet, as Nell stood there with her tea going cool between her hands, she heard footsteps. They were not loud. They were not near. They were the sound of somebody walking unhurriedly on stone, and then somebody else, and then 2 people together, and then a slow one with a stick, and then a light quick one, a child's one, running. She listened for a long while. Nobody crossed the bridge at all. When at last she went up the narrow stairs to the little room under the roof, she found that she was not frightened. That surprised her more than the sound had. She lay under 3 blankets that smelled of lavender and cedar, and she listened to the fire settling downstairs. And she thought, in that loose, unbuttoned way that thoughts go just before sleep, that a bridge is a thing whose entire life is people walking over it, and that it would be very strange indeed if it did not have opinions about them. Then she slept, and the river went on going past the village all night, taking the reflections of the stars downstream, and not keeping a single one. Chapter 3. The Bridgeman and his ledger. In the morning the valley was full of mist, and the mist was full of light, and the bridge stood in the middle of it like something remembered rather than seen. Nell went down to it after breakfast. Up close the stone was warmer in colour than it had looked from the hill, a soft biscuit brown, worn round at every edge that a hand might reach for. The parapet came up to her waist. The coping stones along the top were dipped in the middle, each one like the step of a much-used stair, and she understood that this was simply what happens to stone when enough elbows lean on it for enough years. The man from the night before was there, sweeping. He was old but not frail, with white hair going in several directions, and a coat that had been repaired at both elbows by somebody who cared more about warmth than tidiness. He swept the way people sweep when the sweeping is not urgent. A grey cat sat on the parapet beside him, with its feet tucked under itself, watching the broom with the deep, unblinking attention of a creature who has never once helped with anything. "Good morning," said Nell. "Good morning," said the bridgeman. "You will be Alice Vane's granddaughter." "I will be." "I am. How did you know?" "You stopped in the middle." Nell looked down. She was, in fact, standing at the exact centre of the middle arch, and she had no memory of choosing to. "She used to do the same," he said. "Every crossing, rain or shine. Wilfrid Ambrose." He offered a hand with a good deal of broom dust on it, and she shook it anyway, and the cat rearranged one paw to show that it had noticed. "That is Pewter," said Wilfrid. "She is not friendly. She simply likes to know things." He leaned the broom against the parapet and sat down on the stone bench built into the recess above the pier, where the bridge widens out to let carts pass, and he patted the seat beside him, and Nell sat. From inside the recess the sound of the river changed. It came up through the arch below and arrived softened, gentled, as though the stone had taken the sharpness out of it on the way. "You keep the bridge," said Nell. "I keep the lanterns and the parapet and the ledger. The bridge keeps itself. It has been doing it since before my grandfather, and he was a man who did not believe in anything, and even he took his hat off halfway across." "There is a ledger." Wilfrid took from his inside pocket a book bound in dark green cloth, swollen with damp and dried again more than once, and he laid it on his knee and opened it in the middle. The pages were ruled into 3 columns. In the first column, dates. In the second, in a great variety of hands going back a very long way, a list of small things. 1 blue hair ribbon, 1 brass button, coat military, 1 thimble, silver worn thin at the crown, a marble green chipped, a key to nothing, 4 teeth, milk in a twist of paper. 1 tin whistle, a photograph of a young man, name unknown, smiling, and in the 3rd column, sometimes another date and a word or two beside it. Returned, 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 collected by the sun, returned in the snow. "People leave things on the bridge," said Wilfrid. "By accident?" "Sometimes by accident, sometimes not." He turned a page with a thumb that had been broken once and set well. "There is a habit here. A person who is leaving Ashcombe Ford for good will stop in the middle and put something down on the parapet. Something small. Something they would rather not carry and would rather not lose either. And the bridge keeps it. For how long? Until it is wanted, said Wilfred, as though this were an entirely ordinary sort of arrangement, like leaving an umbrella in a porch. Chapter 4. What the Parapet Keeps. Nell spent that week making the cottage habitable, which is a slow and satisfying kind of work, and she found that she was inventing reasons to cross the river. There was no real need. The shop was on her side. The lane went up to the church on her side, but there was a footpath on the far bank that ran under the willows, and there was a baker whose bread was frankly better, and there was the bridge itself, and by Thursday she had stopped pretending. She learned the crossing, the way you learn a stair in the dark. She learned that the first arch had a hollow note under a cart, and the third had a fuller one. She learned that swallows nested under the middle pier, and came out over the water like thrown stones that had changed their minds. She learned that the coping stone 11th from the near end had a groove worn into it, deep and smooth, and exactly the width of a rope, from some forgotten year when something heavy had needed hauling. And she learned about the niches. They were not obvious. Between certain of the coping stones, where the mortar had gone, there were small dry gaps, some no bigger than a finger joint. On her fourth crossing she noticed a bone button sitting in one of them. On her fifth she noticed a folded paper boat in another, quite dry, though there had been rain in the night. On her sixth crossing she found a boy. He was perhaps 8 years old, and he was lying flat along the top of the parapet on his stomach with one arm down the far side, which is a position that stops the heart of any adult who comes upon it suddenly. "Please do not do that," said Nell. "I am not falling," said the boy without looking round. "I have never fallen. Tom Larkin, there is a hole here and my marble went in it. Then I shall hold your ankles while you get it, and we will neither of us tell your mother." The boy considered this and found it acceptable. She held his ankles. He fished about. He came up pink in the face and triumphant, with nothing at all in his hand. "Gone," he said quite cheerfully, sitting himself down on the parapet with his legs swinging. "That is all right. It will come back." "Will it?" "Things do." He said it the way children say the rules of a game they have known all their lives and never once questioned. You lose something on the bridge, and one day you want it, and there it is. My father lost his whistle when he was my age, and it came back the winter my grandmother died. It was in his coat pocket, and it had not been in his coat pocket, if you see. I am not sure I do." "Well," said Tom Larkin, kicking his heels against the warm stone, "you will." He went off towards the far bank, walking on the coping stones for the first 6, and then giving it up as too easy. Nell stayed where she was. The afternoon was very quiet. The water went under her and came out the other side, unhurried, carrying 2 leaves and a piece of sky. She put her hand into the niche where the marble had gone. It was dry and dusty and warm from the sun, and it went in further than a wall has any right to go, and it was empty. Chapter 5. The middle of the bridge at dusk. It was Wilfred who told her the rest of it. On the evening of the 9th day, while he was lighting the fire lantern and she was holding the little tin box of matches for him because his hands were full. "You have been hearing them," he said. It was not a question, so Nell did not answer it as one. "Footsteps," she said, "at night from the cottage window. Everyone who lives within earshot hears them. Some hear them for a week and then never again. Some hear them all their lives. My mother said it was like living beside a mill, and after a while you only notice it when it stops. What is it?" Wilfred set the glass back into the lantern frame and turned the little brass key, and the flame steadied itself and stood up straight. "Every foot that ever crossed," he said. "That is all. Nothing more sinister than that. 600 years of people going to market and coming back from market and carrying babies over and carrying coffins over and running because it was raining. The stone has heard it so often that it knows it by heart. And on a still evening it says it to itself, the way you or I would hum something without noticing we had started." Nell looked down the length of the parapet. The 2 lanterns made 2 warm pools, and between them the stone went along in the blue dusk, quite empty, and quite plainly, quite unmistakably, full of people. "That is not frightening," she said, and heard the surprise in her own voice. "No," said Wilfred. "It is a bridge. A bridge is the least frightening thing that men have ever built. A wall says, 'Stop.' A tower says, 'Look at me.' A bridge says, 'Come across. I will hold you. It is not so far.'" He picked up his broom, which he carried everywhere the way other men carry a stick. "Stand in the middle a while," he said. "You have been meaning to since you got off the coach." And he went away up the lane with Pewter walking behind him at a distance calculated to suggest that she was going the same way by coincidence. Nell went to the middle of the bridge. She put her hands on the coping stone, which was still warm, though the air above the water had gone cool, and she leaned on it in the dipped place where a great many other people had leaned before her, and she looked downstream at the willows going dark, and she listened. They came slowly, not out of the dark, not from anywhere in particular. They came up out of the stone under her hands and out of the arches under her feet, and they were not loud, and there were a great many of them. Boots, clogs, bare feet, running. The clip of a pony. A heavy tread with a pause in it, where a man shifted a sack from one shoulder to the other. 2 people walking so exactly in step that they must have been arguing or in love. A dog. A great many dogs, actually, over the years. Somebody stopping in the middle. Somebody always stopping in the middle. And then, quite distinctly, close by on her left hand, the sound of a person setting a basket down on the parapet and letting out the long, unguarded sigh of somebody who has carried something heavy exactly as far as they intend to. Nell did not turn round. She had learned in 9 days that this was not that sort of village. "Hello, grandmother," she said. Chapter 6. The Thimble. Nothing answered her in the way that nothing ever does. But when she took her right hand off the parapet, there was something under her palm that had not been under it before. It was a thimble. It was silver, and it was worn thin at the crown, where 60 years of a needle had pressed in the same place, and it had a band of small engraved flowers round the bottom of it that had gone almost smooth. The inside of it was still warm, the way the inside of a thimble is when it has just come off a finger. Nell held it in both hands and stood very still. She was 7 years old again, and it was winter, and the fire in the cottage on Milk Lane was doing exactly what fires do, and she was lying on the rag rug with her chin on her arms, watching the flames come up between the logs. And behind her, in the chair, her grandmother was mending something, and the sound of it was the small, dry tick of a thimble against a needle, and the softer sound of thread being pulled through cloth, and every so often the sound of scissors. She remembered that she had been sulking about something. She could not remember what. Some enormous 7-year-old grievance entirely forgotten, entirely finished. She remembered that her grandmother had said nothing about it at all. She had simply gone on mending and let the fire and the ticking of the thimble do the work, and by the grievance had gone off somewhere else to be somebody else's problem. And Nell had fallen asleep on the rug with her boots still on, and had been carried up the narrow stairs. She had not thought about any of that in 20 years, not once. It had not been lost exactly. It had only been put down somewhere, the way you put a thing down on a parapet. The lanterns burned at either end of the bridge. The river went underneath. Nell Vane stood in the middle with the thimble in her hands and cried a little, quite comfortably, the way you can cry when nobody is watching and nothing whatever is wrong. Then she dried her face on her sleeve, which her grandmother would have had opinions about, and she walked home. That night she slept 10 hours without turning over. Chapter 7. The Ledger, the second column. In the morning she took the thimble to Wilfrid Ambrose. He was on the bench in the recess with the green book open on his knee, and pewter on the parapet beside him, and he looked at the thimble in Nell's palm for a while without touching it. Then he turned back through the ledger, a long way back, past the war, past a run of pages in the same neat hand that stopped abruptly, past a page that had been rained on until he came to a line written in ink, gone brown. One thimble, silver, worn thin at the crown. Beside it, the date. And in the third column, nothing at all. She left it the year she came here, said Wilfrid, which was the year she married, which was the year she stopped being a Bellamy and started being a Vane. She came over the bridge with everything she owned in a basket, and she put that down and went on. Why would she leave it? You would know better than I would. Nell thought about it. She thought about a young woman coming into a village where she knew nobody, over 3 arches of pale stone, with her whole life in a basket, and stopping in the middle. To have a reason to stay, she said slowly. You do not leave a thing behind for good. You leave it where you can come back for it. Wilfrid nodded, as though she had passed something. Only she never did come back for it, he said. She never needed it. She had her hands full for 60 years. He took out a pencil, licked it, and wrote in the third column in careful capitals, "Returned," and then the date. And then, after a pause, and in smaller letters, "To the granddaughter." He closed the book. "Now then," he said, "are you stopping, or are you going?" The question was asked so lightly that Nell understood at once that it was the most serious question anybody in Ashcombe Ford had asked her. She looked along the parapet. She looked at the swallows going in and out under the pier. She looked at the far bank where the footpath went off under the willows towards a baker whose bread was frankly better, and at the near bank where a lane went up between garden walls to a cottage with a beam that everybody hit their head upon, and a fire that had been laid ready for a woman who might arrive on Thursday or Friday, or not at all. "I am stopping," she said. "Then you had better leave something," said Wilfred, "or the bridge will not know." Nell had thought about this too, on the way down the lane, which is why she had come with 2 things in her pocket rather than 1. She took out the folded shopping list. It was in handwriting she had not seen since she was a child, and it said, "Flour and candles and a quarter of tea, and mind to ask about the gate," and it was the most ordinary piece of paper in the world. She had read it 4 times at the kitchen table that morning, and she had discovered that she did not need to read it a 5th. She folded it small and put it into the dry niche between the coping stones, the one that went in further than a wall has any right to go. Then she took the thimble and put that on her finger where it fitted, because of course it did. "1 shopping list," said Wilfred, opening the book again. "Paper. Ordinary." "It is not ordinary," said Nell. He looked up at her from under the white hair going in several directions, and something at the corner of his mouth moved. "No," he agreed, and wrote it down as 1 shopping list, paper, not ordinary, and the bridge, so far as anybody could tell, made no comment whatsoever. Chapter 8. The Long Quiet. The autumn came into the valley the way it does, without an announcement. The willows went yellow at the tips and then all over. The water meadows held their mist until 9 in the morning and then let it go reluctantly. The swallows under the pier held a good deal of loud discussion for 3 days, and then were simply not there any more, and the space they left was quiet in a way that the quiet before them had not been. Nell Vane put curtains in the cottage on Milk Lane. She mended the gate that her grandmother had been meaning to ask about. She learned which of the blue plates on the dresser was cracked, and kept it anyway. She learned to duck under the beam without thinking, which took her rather longer than she expected, and cost her a good deal of dignity in the meantime. She crossed the bridge most days, and sometimes twice. In November she held Tom Larkin's ankles for a 2nd time, on a different niche, and this time he came up with a green marble, chipped, and was so unsurprised by it that Nell laughed out loud on a cold morning and startled a heron off the shallows. In December it snowed, and Wilfred Ambrose swept the parapet clear at 7 in the morning, so that the coping stones stood up out of the whiteness in a long pale line. And Pewter walked the whole length of the bridge with her feet lifted very high and an expression of enormous grievance. And in the evenings, when the fire was doing what fires do, and the lamps were lit, and the day had been folded up and put away, Nell would hear it from the window, or from the settle, or from the little room under the roof with 3 blankets that smelled of lavender and cedar. Footsteps on stone, boots and clogs and bare feet running. Somebody with a stick, somebody carrying something heavy from one bank to the other, going slowly, taking their time, in no danger at all. A dog trotting ahead and coming back. A child running. Always a child running somewhere on that bridge, in some year or another. And somebody stopping in the middle, the way people do, leaning on the warm stone in the dipped place, looking at the water going by underneath. It was not a lonely sound. That was the thing about it. It was the opposite of a lonely sound. It was 600 years of people coming home, arriving over 3 arches of pale stone in the blue of the evening, and the bridge holding every one of them up and remembering every one of them, and not once in all that time letting a single one of them fall. Sleep now. The fire has settled. The lanterns are lit at both ends. The river is going quietly past the village, taking the reflections of the stars downstream and keeping none of them, and there is nothing at all in the world that needs carrying tonight. The bridge remembers you too. It is not so far. Come across.